Well, hey guys, it's Krista Watson here from Krista Quilts, and on today's tutorial, I'm going to teach you a very simple method for spray basting your quilts so you can quilt them on a domestic machine. Now, I'm going to demonstrate on this quilt behind me called Color Weave, but you can do this process on any pattern that you choose, any quilt, and any size quilt. When I show you this process, I am using 505 basting spray and my design wall that's here behind me. However, stay tuned for the end of the video where I share some bonus tips on how you can do the entire process on a table. So let's get started. So the first thing I've done is I have a plastic table set up outside in my backyard, and I have put a queen size flat sheet on top of it to catch any of the overspray. You can also do this in any well-ventilated area so that the spray can dissipate. I've taken my backing, which happens to be a pieced backing, and I've put it on top of the table, and now I'm taking that 505 basting spray and I'm putting a light coating of spray all the way on the wrong side of the backing. One of the reasons I love making pieced backings is it kind of makes it easier for me to know how much I have spray basted and where I need to go to next. And you'll notice that it's totally fine if the backing is covering the entire table, it's draping around on all four sides. I basically just spray one section at a time, and if the quilt itself sticks on itself, it's okay. It's still going to come apart, so it's not a big deal. I can usually baste about 2 to 3 throw-sized quilts out of one large size can. Once the backing is done, I'm just going to kind of fold it all up. I'm going to keep the wrong sides out, and I'm just going to set it aside, and I'm going to do the exact same thing on the quilt top. So I'm laying out the quilt top wrong side up, again using that sheet to protect the table, to protect the area around me. Obviously, if I've got a large quilt, it's going to take a little bit more time. If I have a smaller quilt, it won't take up as much space, but it's just a standard size table, so it's not that big of a deal. It happens to be windy this day, but that's fine. I am just, again, spraying the entire area in sections, the top and then the sides. And when I'm spraying, I'm making sure that the spray comes out evenly, and it's kind of like if you're starching. I just use a light coating of spray and I cover the entire area. Once I'm finished with the quilt top, I'm going to set both of those aside, and then I'm going to take them inside to finish the basting process. Here's a bonus tip when you're using the basting spray. I always shake the can ahead of time, and I squeeze a little bit to make sure that the nozzle sprays clean and clear. Every now and then, if you have a very old can of spray, it might be kind of gunked up, and in that case, I wouldn't use it. But as long as the basting spray sprays clean and clear and you can't see it, it almost looks invisible, you'll have no problems. I'm going to assemble all 3 layers of the quilt in my sewing room on this really nice design wall. Basically, my design wall is made out of a couple of foam core boards that I have covered with a white flannel sheet and then attached to a wall in my room. Be sure to check out the links in the video or my blog at kristaquilts.com, where I have a step-by-step photo tutorial showing how to make my design wall. So I'm taking my quilt backing wrong side out, and it's sticky on the wrong side, but I'm basically pinning it to the design wall, and I'm allowing gravity to kind of pull down the weight of the quilt to get out most of the folds and wrinkles. Then I'm going to spend a few minutes, and I'm going to either take my hands or a long acrylic ruler, and I'm kind of patting it all into place, smoothing it out, because I basically want to have a nice flat quilt backing, and that's going to make the process go smoothly. So I'll just take a few minutes looking all around. I have ironed my quilt backing ahead of time, so it's nice and flat, but of course it's going to get a little bit wrinkly as I work with it. So I'll just take a few moments and smooth it out as nice and wrinkle-free as possible. Then I'm going to repeat this process with a large piece of batting. Now, you can play around and choose whatever favorite batting you love to work with. My personal favorite battings are natural fibers that are going to breathe and they stick to the quilt better. Some of my favorites are cotton, wool, or in this case, I'm actually using a silk batting. It's called Hobbs Tuscany Silk, and I usually get it by the roll. I make sure and cut the batting so that it is going to be a few inches larger than the quilt top, but slightly smaller than the quilt backing. And as I smooth the batting out, I'm using that long acrylic ruler again to kind of smush it all together, smooth out any wrinkles as I go. And it's really kind of satisfying as I smooth out all the wrinkles. Now, as I'm working the batting and making it nice and flat, if there are any wrinkles or any puckers, it's very easy to lift the batting up and reposition it as many times as you need to get it nice and smooth. It doesn't have to be 100% perfectly smooth, but I make it as smooth as I can. So I'll repeat this process again with my finished quilt top. This time it is right side out and wrong side facing the batting. So basically what I'm doing is pinning it again to the top and letting gravity pull down the weight of the quilt, and I'm going to kind of smush it to the backing and batting using my hands to kind of get it all in place. You'll notice I've been using a step ladder. That's because I'm very short. So it's a nice stable step ladder. I just go up and down because this quilt is rather large. If it's a smaller quilt, I don't necessarily have to use a step ladder, but this really gives me lots of room to work. So I'm basically getting the quilt top as flat as I can, and then I'm going back with my acrylic ruler to smooth everything in place. Now, I have a separate acrylic ruler that I use just for basting, and if it starts getting a buildup of basting spray, I can just wash it off with warm soapy water. The really nice thing about using a long acrylic ruler is it basically acts as an extra arm, or it's like an extension of your hand so that you can smooth out large areas of the quilt. And especially with a quilt that's very geometric like this one, that has long straight lines vertically and horizontally, I can basically take the ruler and use it to kind of block the quilt into place. So I can run it horizontally along each seam or vertically along each of the up and down seams and kind of get everything in place. Because the secret I have learned with machine quilting is that if all three layers of the quilt, the backing and the batting and the quilt top, are nice and flat and smooth and straight, you're going to have a much better time machine quilting. So I'll take a few more minutes and I will smooth out the entire quilt top. This is probably the part that takes me the longest, only because there's so many seams with this quilt. If I were working on a quilt with fewer seams, it would probably be a little faster. But in reality, this entire basting process only took me about an hour from start to finish, so it's not really that much time. Again, I'm going to go up and down and all the way around, and if any of the quilt is sticking to itself, if there's any puckers or wrinkles, I can just gently lift it up, reposition it, and I can make sure that I smooth it all in place. By using the ruler in this way, I'm basically smushing the quilt to itself so it's nice and compressed. Once I'm happy with how all three layers look, then I'm going to take a pair of batting scissors and I'm going to cut around on all sides of the quilt, leaving only about 1 or 2 inches of batting and backing sticking out. I like to trim it up pretty close so that there's not a chance that those extra layers are going to flip underneath me while I'm quilting. So I'm cutting off all 3 sides of the quilt, and then when I pull it off the design wall, I will go ahead and trim off the excess on the top as well. So the last step of my spray basting process, and probably the most magical step, is ironing both sides of the quilt to set the glue. So I'm starting with the backing side of the quilt, and once this is all done, I will flip it over and I will iron the front side. Now, this is a rather large quilt, so I am using what's called a big board. This is basically a big piece of plywood that fits right on top of my regular size ironing board that gives me lots of space to move the quilt around. And I'm just using a very inexpensive iron. I'm not using any steam, and my iron is set to the hottest temperature. Now, if you're not sure, you might want to test this out ahead of time, but basically what I'm doing is I'm just ironing one part of the quilt at a time. And not only does this allow me to set the glue, I smush all the layers together, I can actually get out any wrinkles that might occur, and that's why I do it on the back side first. So I'm basically just moving one section of the quilt at a time, going methodically, one section, moving and shifting the quilt. It's kind of a lot to manhandle, and this is the same process I do on a bigger quilt, but it really works out well. So once the backing is all ironed, then I'm going to do the same thing on the front side of the quilt, and you can just see, again, one section at a time. I try to be methodical. I try to press one row and then scooch the quilt over,
And the nice thing about this is it just really makes the entire quilt smushed together, flat and smooth. And once this is all done, it's ready to quilt.
Now I know what you might be thinking. Number one, I don't have a design wall. How do I do this without a design wall? Or maybe your quilt is larger than your design wall. Well, that happened to me on a king size quilt that I made called Interlinked. It was too big to fit on my design wall, so I actually spray basted the entire thing outside on a couple of tables pushed together. So I'm going to show you a super speedy version of that, but be sure to check the comments for a link to a full-length tutorial showing how I did this on a king-size quilt. So let's take a look.
So this super sped up video shows me doing the same exact process I just showed you, but now I have two tables pushed together. This time I started with the front of the quilt and then I did the back of the quilt secondly, because I'm going to leave that there. I'm doing the whole basting process outside on these two tables. That's my king size batting that I am just laying over on top of the batting, and I'm still using that ruler to smooth everything out. And it's going to take a little bit of time to do this. I've got a lot of maneuvering, but once I finish the backing and the batting, then I put the quilt top on, smooth it out with my hands, smooth it out with the ruler, and then trim off the excess with those batting shears. Once I'm done with the basic basting process, I'm going to take it back inside, get it all ready, and I'm going to iron it again, backside first and then the front. Same process, just a bigger quilt, and you can see how beautifully I quilted it.
Well, what did you think? Are you a little bit less intimidated to baste and perhaps machine quilt your own quilts? Be sure to check out my other videos where I show how to actually quilt large quilts on a domestic machine. What I'm telling you is spray basting is a huge part of the process. Once you get this down, machine quilting is a breeze. So now you have no excuses to baste your quilts, quilt your quilts, and most of all, enjoy using them. Be sure to check out the description box for links to everything that I talked about in this video, and let me know what questions you have. I'm here to help you every step of the way. Until next time, happy quilting.